Hi, I'm Sarah Cater, and you're watching Aliens, Clones Airships. So today I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about Wyrforra by McKenna Miller. I apologize for the weird glares. It's because I'm using my phone to film, and I recently dropped my phone and cracked my screen, and unfortunately enough, one of the cracks is right over my camera lens. The structure of this video is going to go as follows. I'm going to give the summary as I always do. I'm going to give my perspective about changing first-person perspectives. And lastly, I'm going to tell you about all the reasons why I loved this book, because I really enjoyed reading this. So without further ado, let's get started. Wyrforra and humans have been trapped in a war for over a decade. The human world is completely unprepared when the Wyrforra attack. Unlike their opponents, Wyrforra are agile, quick, and thick-skinned. But their most distinguishing trait are their eyes. Wyrforra pupils are shaped more like slits, like cat eyes. This book follows 10 first-person perspective accounts with insight into the minds of both Wyrforra and humans. Each character in this story seems just as important as the next. Though I imagine of the 10 most commonly used characters in this story, it is Robin's perspective that is the most important and central to the entire plot. Dare and Robin are the dream team, fighting alongside each other and other members of the human resistance. Robin, an incredibly skilled fighter and council member, is a mysterious character who covers her face with a mask in order to protect her identity. The whole camp trusts the dream team until a new face appears after a battle and threatens to tear apart the bindings that hold the camp together, using Robin as a scapegoat. The Wyrforra king Arenvir is a ruthless man who will stop at nothing to destroy the worthless humans. His assassins, Odira and Almir, know that there is more to the war than the king is letting on. Odira makes it her mission to find out exactly what the king is hiding, knowing that it could very well be his downfall and the key to her future success. Can the humans at the camp survive? Can enemies coexist? And what are Wyrforra? Where did Wyrforra come from? And what exactly happens to Dare when he falls off the building in the very beginning of the story? Before I explained what I enjoyed about this book, and I should note that I enjoyed this book a lot, I mentioned that this book was written entirely in first person. Now, this is my own personal preference, but I am not a fan of changing first person perspectives in a book. The reason being, for me, that it becomes confusing who the speaker is. Now, Miller has kindly made this a bit simpler by making the speaker the title of each chapter. However, I still feel like this takes away from the flow of the story. While I enjoyed this story a lot, I feel like I would have enjoyed it more if it were written in third person omniscient. That way, the reader still knows exactly what the characters are thinking, gets each fresh perspective, and that way they also know who is speaking, and they are not confused by who I is currently. One more note that I have is that some of the characters and the name of the book are slightly confusing in the way that they're pronounced. Now, Miller has kindly, again, provided us with the pronunciation guide and character guide for her book, so that way we can look at it and cross-reference while reading in order to better understand how to pronounce each character's name. It is my recommendation to anyone considering reading this book that you pick up the character guide and pronunciation guide before reading, memorize it, and then read the book, because I feel like it will help the flow of the book so much more if you know how to pronounce the names and you know how to pronounce Wyrforra before you read the book in its entirety. And that way you don't interrupt the flow while you're reading. I'm going to be putting the link above and in the description to the character guide and the pronunciation guide. That way, anyone planning on reading this book will have the chance to do a little bit of research before reading. So now that I've mentioned the small critiques that I have, and they are very small critiques because these are all my own personal preference, I cannot wait any longer to explain to you exactly what I loved about this book. Every character in this book, with the exception of Mad Cat, is strong regardless of race, sexual orientation, gender, and species. I was happy to see that each character was not stereotypically gendered. The women were just as strong in this book as the men. And there was a lot of representation in this book. This book mentions persons of color and LGBT characters directly, without them being token characters. In this story, we talk about Captain, who is a black man, but it's only mentioned once and then never mentioned again, because the focus of the story isn't on his race, but rather on who he is as a leader. Yes, Port and Fox were in love, and openly so, because he thinks back to waking up with Port and questions not how the camp is going to treat him and Port as a couple, but rather whether or not they should even be in a relationship because of the war going on. The gay characters and the heterosexual characters both questioned whether or not they should be in a relationship with other people because of the war that was going on, and whether it was a good idea because they didn't want to lose their loved ones. So I liked that there was no queer baiting in this story, and I'm going to put a description of what queer baiting is. Overall, we know that these characters are openly LGBT, and we also have representation of persons of color. I also loved that every character voice, while not different in a stereotypical way, were different enough that you can distinguish between each character as a person. Loved seeing the interactions between Wyrforra and humans, because no two encounters were the same. Then the human resistance camp, there were still internal conflicts as well. I think that all of the interactions and motives in this story were extremely relatable and organic, and nothing at all felt forced. While all of the characters in this story are amazing, I have to say that my two favorites are Tylos and Hadril. Tylos is a military buff who is injured in combat and forced to survive alongside a human named Ariana, who is also near death. Tylos has one of the most interesting character developments in this story. And then there's Hadril, otherwise known as Madril, otherwise known as Mad Cat, because he slowly loses his mind in captivity. I really enjoyed his character a lot because his transition between sanity and insanity is incredible and extremely realistic. There was not a moment where I read this and thought, there's no way he went this insane this quickly. He lost his mind in a way that I feel like I would have lost my mind in captivity. The way that he loses his mind and the things that he does are extremely realistic as well. I highly recommend this book to anyone who likes dystopia and fantasy. And if you're a person who doesn't like changing first-person perspectives in a book, I still recommend reading this book. It's going to be a bit of a challenge just getting past the first-person perspectives, but it is definitely worth it because the plot is wonderful and the characters are extremely interesting. So I do recommend reading it. Just if you have trouble like me, make sure that before you start the book, you look at the character guide and the pronunciation guide ahead of time. That way you don't interrupt your flow of reading. It also helps before you start reading each chapter to know that the chapter name shows you who the perspective belongs to. I loved it. I loved the plot. I loved the characters. I found the entire idea of Wyrforra to be interesting. If I were a Wyrforra myself, I would have to say that my eyes would be violet, not unlike someone that you meet in this story. Anyway guys, this has been my review of Wyrforra by McKenna Miller. I will drop the link to the book on Amazon below. I will also leave a link to the character description and the character pronunciation guide. So that way you can get a head start on your research before reading this book because, again, I highly recommend it. And I'm also going to be picking up the second book in the story called Wereling. Anyway, bye guys!